Public debt levels remain rather elevated in a number of countries, especially following the extraordinary response to the pandemic and the energy crisis, while new demands for fiscal resources continue to mount. Fiscal policies today must address demographic pressures on pension and healthcare systems. They must also finance the green and digital transitions, and fiscal policy must also respond to legitimate calls for stronger defense capabilities amid heightened geopolitical tensions. For Europe, this only means more efforts to strengthen its autonomy, while at the same time materially stepping up its competitiveness. All this occurs against an environment where growth prospects, as you all know, remain relatively subdued, and where political consensus around fiscal priorities appears increasingly fragmented. The question is not whether fiscal policy matters, but rather how it can be rendered most impactful, while at the same time ensuring it remains sustainable when meeting society's evolving needs. Our first session addresses fiscal stagnation and sovereign risk, examining the fundamental challenges of low-growth environments and their implications for debt sustainability. The two first papers of the conference will explore how fiscal policy can become trapped in stagnation and how declining interest rates have altered the dynamics of sovereign debt risk. They thus provide us with crucial insights for policymakers in navigating today's economic landscape. The second session will delve into monetary and fiscal policy interactions, a topic of paramount importance as central banks normalize their policies and their extraordinary measures after years of outstanding measures. The research presented here examines how central bank credibility interacts with fiscal choices and how fiscal redistribution risks manifest in treasury debt markets. This session will thus offer fresh perspectives on the coordination challenges between monetary and fiscal authorities. Following lunch, our policy panel will bring together leading voices to discuss priorities and challenges for fiscal policies in Europe. This conversation will bridge academic and research policymaking, addressing the difficult trade-offs that governments are facing today and exploring pathways towards resilient fiscal frameworks. Our keynote lecture, to be delivered by Professor George Mario Sangelettos from Northwestern University, will examine monetary fiscal interactions through the lens of heterogeneous versus representative agent models, providing theoretical foundations for understanding how fiscal and monetary policies jointly affect economic outcomes. The third session, already planned for tomorrow morning, focuses on perceptions of public debt and fiscal narratives. Understanding how citizens and markets perceive fiscal policy is crucial for its effectiveness. The papers to be presented in this third session use innovative survey data and narrative identification methods to reveal how policy expectations form and how fiscal measures actually affect economic activity across the European Union. Our final session in the program will address geopolitical tensions and the fiscal implications of war, reflecting urgent contemporaneous concerns. The research to be presented therein examines both the economic cost of conflict and how defense spending affects European economies, providing evidence on topics that have moved from theoretical interest to immediate policy relevance. I am confident that the cutting-edge research and robust discussions over these 2 days will improve our understanding of today's fiscal policy challenges and will contribute to better policy outcomes. So thank you for joining us. Again, thank you very much to my colleagues from the IMF Fiscal Affairs Department for excellent collaboration. And I wish you a productive and stimulating conference. Thank you very much. So, thank you much. So with this, I think we can move to the first session of the day on fiscal stagnation and sovereign risk. As said, this session will feature, please, the speakers, can you move to the stage? So we will have two papers. The first one is going to be presented by Luca Fornaro from CREI. The paper is Fiscal Stagnation, which is joint work with Martin Wolf, and it's going to be discussed by Xavier De Bruyne from the National Bank of Belgium. So, Luca, please, over to you. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and this joint work with Martin. All right, so as we all know, in most advanced economies, public debt to GDP ratio are at historically high level. And this has sparked, of course, a heated debate both about the sustainability of this stock of public debt, but also about its macroeconomic implications. Now, often this debate is led on the premise, on the notion that productivity growth is not affected by fiscal policy, does not depend on fiscal policy. However, recent empirical evidence suggests otherwise. So there is recent evidence that firms' investment, especially investment in intangibles and R&D, responds to changes in taxes, in corporate taxes. There is also evidence that some form of public investment, especially investment in public R&D, tend to be complementary with private investment and contribute positively to productivity growth. Moreover, if you look at some historical episodes, you do see a connection between fiscal variables and the path of productivity growth. And Italy, my country, is a good example. So here I'm showing you the ratio of public debt to GDP, primary surplus to GDP, and productivity growth for Italy, the blue line, and a group of advanced economies, the red line, just to compare a little bit. So in Italy, we had a very fast accumulation of public debt during the 80s. Since then, we've been living with a high stock of public debt, and governments had to come up with large primary surplus in order to ensure the sustainability of this debt. And interestingly, this period of high primary surpluses coincided with a sharp slowdown in productivity growth. Now, what we want to do with this paper is quite simple. We want to think about the connection between these three variables, public debt, fiscal policy as captured by the surplus, and productivity growth, using a relatively simple framework. So we start from a standard endogenous growth model, and we augment it with public debt and fiscal policy. So there are two pillars, really, in the model. The first one is the classic notion from the endogenous growth literature that productivity growth is driven by investment, by profit-maximizing firms. The second pillar comes from the fiscal side of the model, and it captures the idea that a government who needs to run large primary surplus is likely to generate fiscal distortion that will hinder private investment and growth. Think about charging high distortionary taxes or cutting on productive public expenditure. Why is it interesting to think jointly about these two features? Well, because they create a two-way interaction or a vicious cycle between fiscal policy and growth. And the intuition is quite simple. Imagine that the government, to sustain its debt, has to come up with a high primary surplus. Then it's likely to charge high distortionary taxes, cut on productive public investment, so generates high fiscal distortion, which are going to depress private investment and so growth. But when growth slows down, the public debt to GDP ratio tends to increase because GDP tends to fall. So in order to stabilize this ratio, the government will need to come up with another round of fiscal adjustment with an even higher fiscal surplus. And this will generate further fiscal distortion, which will depress further growth, and so on. So essentially, much of what I will say today is about this vicious cycle between fiscal distortion and weak productivity growth. In particular, I will show you that this vicious cycle may lead to steady-state multiplicity, so to multiple long-run equilibria in which the economy may land. So first, there might be a fiscally sound equilibrium in which the surplus required to stabilize debt is low, so fiscal distortion are not very significant, and investment and growth are high. But there could also be another long-run steady state in which the economy might end up, which we call a fiscal stagnation steady state, in which instead high surpluses, high fiscal distortion, and low productivity growth tend to self-sustain each other. So how do you fall from a fiscally sound steady state to a fiscal stagnation one? Well, there are different possibilities that the model highlights. You could fall due to hysteresis effects. So I will show you that temporary shocks to fundamental, temporary negative shocks to fundamental, may move the economy from the fiscally sound to the fiscal stagnation steady state. I will also argue that sometimes animal spirits, so people expectation, might play a role. And then in the last part of the talk, I will discuss a little bit how to exit fiscal stagnation, and here I will make 3 points. So first, I will argue that you need a big push, a regime change in fiscal policy. So marginal policy intervention will not lead you out of fiscal stagnation. You need a drastic policy change. Second, the model highlights essentially 2 strategies to get out of stagnation: austerity or pro-growth policy, so policies that give more incentives for firms to invest. Of course, it would be desirable to exit fiscal stagnation through higher growth, so by using pro-growth policy. But what the model tells you is that this might be tough to do if the government lacks credibility, if the government lacks the ability to commit to its future policies. Okay, let me jump straight into the model. So the baseline of the model, the basic of the model is a standard endogenous growth framework, augmented with public debt and distortionary taxes. So we study an infinite horizon closed economy inhabited by household, firms, and a government. And to make things simple, I will abstract from uncertainty. I will focus on perfect foresight equilibrium. The household side is as simple as it gets. So there is a representative household who gets utility from consumption. This household works every period 1 unit of labor. There you can see the budget constraints. So the consumption good is the numerator. So the household spending consumption. It pays some lump sum taxes to the government. It purchases government bond D, which pays the interest rate R. And on the right-hand side, you can see the sources of income. So the household gets the labor income. It gets the profits from the firm. So this household is getting all the income from the economy. And it's getting the return on previous investment in government debt. The optimal saving decision of the household gives us a standard Euler equation, which essentially links the equilibrium interest rate with the rate of consumption growth. The idea being that if household forecasts, for instance, to be poorer, their consumption growth to slow down, they want to save more, and this will drive down the equilibrium interest rate. Now, the strength of this effect in this model is captured by the parameter gamma. And I will assume throughout the talk that gamma is smaller than 1, so that the interest rate reacts less than 1 for 1 with consumption growth, and I will tell you why I think that's a good assumption in the context of the model. The supply side of the model is where interesting things start to happen. So first, there is a sector producing a final good, which is inhabited by competitive firms. These firms produce using labor and a continuum of intermediate inputs of measure 1. So here, xj denotes the quantity of intermediate input j used in production, aj the quality of that intermediate good, and growth will happen through increases in this quality, as in standard model of vertical innovation. And profit maximization by this firm give a standard demand for labor and each intermediate good. The intermediate good sector is where the important thing happens. So here the idea is that each intermediate good is produced by a single monopolist, will take action to maximize profits. 1 unit of the final good is needed to manufacture 1 unit of whatever intermediate good. This means that the optimal price set by the monopolist will be just a markup over the marginal cost. And in equilibrium, each monopolist will earn profits which are proportional to its productivity. So here the important feature is that a firm has an incentive to invest to increase its productivity because it will earn higher profits. And then we assume that the government might tax profits at rate tau p. And I will tell you what this assumption plays in the model in a second. All right, the innovation process. Again, things here are very simple. So each firm might invest in order to increase the quality of its own intermediate good. We make a simplifying assumption, which doesn't matter for the result, but simplifies about the algebra. That is, we assume that the rents from innovation last a single period. So at the start of the period, the firm is born. It inherits a particular product. It invests optimally. It earns the profit next period. Then it exits the market. Under this assumption, the firm will set investing in innovation to